ability to, instead of like attacking provision and provision and provision and worrying about this, that, and the other, which you need to understand in order to know why you need to be transformational, but to instead of, you know, singling out music, to not single out music, because that's what's happening. And I mean, you know, the CZO, singled out music, doesn't talk about guns, doesn't talk about drugs, doesn't talk about prostitution, that sort of thing, but music. And that's something that you all are hitting hard on. But I think if you can organize in a way that says, you know, we're tired of being singled out, regardless of how you do it, whether you're banning music in the French Quarter restaurants, and does that mean that it's restaurants and, you know, venues like WWOZ, for instance, can we have live broadcasts of music at WWOZ? It's crazy to think, but I would say that, you know, odds are you can't. Then if we can attack it from that standpoint, I think that you all do such a good job of getting it out there that, and getting your message out there. I think that's what you need to focus on, because this music thing needs to go from the CZO. I mean, it really does. And I'm going to go on that point, but because I'm not making sense, swerving hard, UBI drugs. But
let me
I just wanted to say that, and thank you.
We'll talk.
Like that fight, getting music out of it is expression, not consumption.
And I think one point too is it's live music specifically they talk about, right?
Even recorded music, fuck it. If it's recorded music, you know, I mean, I'm louder right now. I'm much louder than anything that any level that's in the existing ordinance. And in the existing, and I'm talking about the noise ordinance.
Right.
The existing noise ordinance, it's even if you're underneath the levels, then you can still be cited because the standard for enforcement is a plainly audible sound.
That's right.
So you can be underneath it all, and as long as the police officer, whoever's enforcing it, can hear you, you're fucked. So it doesn't matter that you're underneath the levels. So that's a problem with the noise thing. The CZO is trying to deal with the noise through zoning.
Right.
And that's wrong. I mean, it's
That's right.
just, it's archaic, and I mean, it's very third world. It's not even third world. It's just, it's bad. And I mean, there's institutionalized ignorance that needs to be penetrated. That's what you all are doing. And so I think that, you know, you focus on the big picture that way. It's what you're doing, and thank you. And you're saying it way better than I can right now. But yeah, get music out of there. Music does not need to be in there. I mean, again, crack is not in the CZO. That's a problem. So, I mean, it sounds extreme, but it's really not when you think about it. It's just not. So, thank you for being here. And thank you all.
I don't know if you were going to talk about it. I know you want to move on
Focus
back.
on the policy.
Can I actually just, one second, just before you go ahead, I wanted to kind of just give a couple of general discussion guidelines, because we're kind of moving into the more discussion part of this. Thank you, by the way. One is just, feel free to identify yourself. You don't have to, but it's often really great to know who's in the room, so whether that's sort of by profession or by neighborhood or by any other identifier. Two is just to be concise and to be, you know, as sort of thoughtful as possible. And three, if somebody says something that really kind of gets at you, or something that you really agree with, if possible, kind of make a note of it and introduce yourself to them afterwards and talk about it, because these sometimes can kind of get into little kind of backwaters. Where are my notes here? Also, just, I'm sure you'll notice, but this is being filmed, just to keep that in mind. If there's something that somebody has a question about and they don't want to have that question on record, feel free to ask me or Ethan after this. I'm trying to think what else. Okay, go.
So we'll go here. Right.
Yeah, sorry. Keith Murder, Mid-City. I actually just got approved, believe it or not, a liquor license for South White Street and Tulane Avenue, right there, Tulane Broad, for my little sidebar I'm going to open up for the legal community over there next to the courthouse. Those of you wanting to invest in an up-and-coming area, Tulane Avenue is ready to rock and roll. My question was, on the arts and culture overlay, and you talked about the VCE, is this an example of them trying to create these entertainment districts versus letting everything grow organically? You know, is that And is that how I'm understanding it? Or?
I would say you're reading it correctly without me having been there for the creation of that, right?
Okay,
So,
okay, that was my question then.
So what can you do in the overlay?
so it sort of varies. I've actually got them printed out, but it is, I don't know, 10 pages of stuff. So it varies. Each overlay is slightly different, but generally the idea is it allows more entertainment use within the overlay. But again, it's tricky. I can't tell you everything because each one changes, and sometimes it allows different things. Sometimes it actually is a little bit more limiting, and so it's tricky. I mean, definitely if you want to go through these 10 pages, you can figure out. But also, it's on. I mean, all the stuff I just printed up from the CPC's website, so you can go through and look at it. And we're gonna put together sort of a document. We've got a document that says the changes, but we're gonna document of all sort of the important things to know and to read and to look at. We'll get that together very shortly.
I wanted to add one other thing, just kind of a way to think about all this, which is that, particularly, I mean, in a lot of different realms of life, but particularly in culture, trying to write laws that capture the reality of what's on the ground now, what has grown organically, is incredibly difficult. And so I think, some of the stuff that's in here, I'm sure was not written with intentions that I would consider good, but some of them may have been. And that, you're trying to legally oversee organic processes that were organic. So that's a way that I often think about it, because it's not that somebody's sort of, trying to write something that with the intention of killing the culture. It's trying to figure out how do you legally regulate things that have gone on for years. I mean, an example being the overlays. By the time the Frenchman overlay was actually put on there, which I think was 2004, I'm pretty sure that when it was actually applied, the reality on the ground already exceeded the number of things that were allowed in it, because it had been so many years of it growing. And so there really is just sort of this aspect of the laws trying to catch up with reality, with whatever the intentions are. So it's just
I think the intentions, people's intentions are good. People's intentions are okay because they think whatever silly thing they think is good. Right? Everybody thinks their stuff. Nobody says, VC4 doesn't come to council and say, we're now going to inject some evil. Well, Nathan Chapman used to, but now. But honestly, but seriously, the whole, is there a chance to combat the whole overlay concept?
I'm gonna come back to that in a second. If that's, is there anybody who had a point or so?
Yeah, the overlay was the only vehicle by which we could get anything. And the St. Claude Arts and Cultural Overlay, it's probably the most liberal one in the code, or at least the one that's in the book, on the books now, because we worked with the musicians and tried to make it give musicians as many places as possible to perform. Now, it's only on St. Claude Avenue, but that's the only way we could do it. There is no other way unless you take each property. And that is something that is very costly to mount a fight over a particular property. The other thing is the live music is allowed in restaurants in the Bucaray, but it's as secondary use. It's not the
It's conditional.
No. Live entertainment, secondary use. It just has to be permitted separately. What's not allowed in the VCC is the non-amplified musical accompaniment for patrons at any restaurant. That's the one where it appears that they intend for McDonald's to be able to have a guitarist play, which is fine. I think people at McDonald's ought to have some.
That doesn't make sense if it's allowed, but then it's not allowed. Yeah. I mean, those two statements contradict each other.
Well, it's different. The live entertainment secondary use requires you to get what's called a mayoralty permit.
Right, but
That's just for like a one-time thing.
No.
Hold on, we're talking about restaurants, so it's two different designations. One is a mayoralty permit is for it's what you call a live entertainment permit. So that's any place that has a live entertainment permit, which there were I think 85 in the city last I knew, which was 2 years ago. the other designation is that restaurants, as part of being a restaurant, could have up to 3 people unamplified, and that was something different, sort of not considered live entertainment. That was just sort of considered like a feature of your restaurant, like having a fountain in the courtyard or something. I mean, just
It's a backdoor way.
it's a
of
backdoor
putting
way,
that
and
in-
that's the
putting
one
that
that's
in
currently
there.
under threat as being removed potentially in the new one.
But that one doesn't require a permit.
Juliet and
So I want to say one thing real quick. So you're all right, they allow a lot of different secondary use, and I just printed this up today. There are 15 different zoning designations in the French Quarter. There are only 3 that actually allows them as a secondary use. So what it is that's the bait and switch. Is it says you can do it as a secondary use, but then the only place it's permitted is BCE, which is Bourbon Street, and then it's conditional, subject to additional restrictions on HMC2 and HMMU, which are, right.
Those are
It's a higher-
historic Marini.
So it's Tremaine, and it's Marion Tremaine Commercial, and that's essentially corridors. That's essentially gonna be, I think that's Claiborne, right? And that might be, I know Rampart is VCC2, which means you could not have live music in Rampart. I'm gonna come back to that. And I think within the we've got about half an hour, the last 15 minutes, I wanna save specifically to talk about, because this is the call to action, what we're gonna do and what's next, to make sure we come back to that. But until then, we're just gonna keep going.
So Juliet and Sam and Heidi.
Real quick, aren't most of the, well, not most, but quite a few of the venues on Freshman Street actually zoned as restaurants? That's what I thought. So there's a problem, obviously.
I mean, they're operating, the music in them is not legal most of the time.
Wow.
Fun fact.
But if you have a wedding,
Right, that's right.
Actually, that brings me to my question. I lived in the Marini for years and years, and suddenly I find myself living in the quarter, which, by the way, is a really weird culture shock. But I live in a place that has a huge courtyard. Judging from what I'm reading here, and I live almost directly across the street from the Irish Cultural Museum, which on any given Saturday has these enormous, loud, wonderful weddings. I get like 4-second lines a day on Saturdays. All I have to do is stand outside and boom, here they come. And one night they had this giant Hindu wedding that went on for literally almost 2 days. It was amazing. And it was live music. Now, what this sounds like it's saying is that if I'm sitting in my courtyard and I invite all y'all over for a party, and we all start, singing sea shanties or something, that I could be arrested, and that would be illegal. When it says down here, live entertainment, including a courtyard. Are you saying that even though I'm in a gated courtyard, private property, that if we all sang, or I said, everybody bring your drums over, because I have a lot of friends that are drummers, and everybody started, that we could be arrested for that, but the Irish Cultural Museum, by some fluke of zoning, can do whatever they do, or would they also be out of business because of that?
Well,
Did that make sense to you?
A wedding is different, it's exempt from that via the zoning because they know that people have bands for weddings, and that's, in terms of inviting people over, there is a difference between places that are open to the public and private in the way things kind of work that way. So no matter what happens, you have to be working under the noise ordinance, right? If you're violating the noise ordinance and singing too loud, everyone's singing too loud, you could be in trouble, right?
So
In terms of
here's an Abita shh,
right.
have some
Right.
rum, shh.
Right, as long as you do it quietly, you'll be all right. But I mean, there's a distinction there between public and private, right? But no matter what, you've got to go to the noise ordinance, and the wedding has to go into the noise ordinance as well. People could call the police on the wedding and say you need to shut them down because they're too loud.
Oh, that's fair, that's
Please
terrible.
don't do that.
That's terrible.
But then
We're not advising that.
Right, but that's a separate issue, and I think that's the thing, is the noise ordinance, though it's tied to the way music clubs work, is a different ordinance, and so it has to also be worked on separately as well. And I think, though they work together, they're separate things, and I think that's an important distinction that has to happen. And we talked about this a little bit, the idea of people trying to use the CZO as a way to circumvent essentially what is bad enforcement of the noise ordinance and say, because they're going to enforce the noise ordinance badly, or whatever ordinance badly, we should just not allow it at all, and that way we don't have to worry about it. And I think that's the crux of the issue.
That's what happened at
we
Mimi's, is
shouldn't
a
be
giant
right.
war of attrition down
Right.
there.
We shouldn't be crafting bad ordinances because we don't think they're going to enforce the one that's done well, right? And I think we shouldn't be saying, we know they're gonna enforce it badly, so we'll just write it that way. We should be working on better enforcement. That's the issue. And I don't think anyone here is against reasonable volume levels enforced well. I think everybody knows when they go places it's too loud, and everyone will understand that. But I think the issue is, we go after the bad actors. We don't create policy that assumes that everyone will become a bad actor.
Right.
And that's the crux of it, and that's the issue that keeps coming up, is you keep saying, it's going to open a Pandora's box, and they're going to become a 24-hour club, and they're going to do all this stuff. It's a hypothetical worst-case scenario that's brought out every time in every project they oppose is, we're not against you, we're against the person that's going to come after you, and it could hypothetically do something that's bad. And that's not how we should be crafting laws or policy.
No.
But that's the argument we hear again and again and again and again. So I will take it off that tangent for a minute and go back.
Isn't a major difference between noise ordinance and zoning, that noise ordinance is what comes outside the building, not inside?
Everything.
And zoning is what you do.
Well, noise ordinance can cover noise emanating from a building.
Yeah,
Emanating
noise
from, so it's
covers
outside.
actions.
But what you do inside, like playing your drums in your
Yeah.
courtyard, if it doesn't come past the gate.
I don't think courtyard would count as inside.
Yeah, courtyards are different animal.
It's essentially what you can hear in the way it's set up now is it's set up, and we can talk about the noise ordinance policies as well, but the way it's written now is it's measured at whoever's making the complaint at their property. So it's where you hear it and make the complaint is where you measure it from. The change that was proposed a year ago was to do it from
where it's.
the property of the place that's making the noise, which is a huge distinction, right? If you're standing outside the front door there, and then this place ends at the sidewalk, right, ends at the street, and someone's drumming in here close to the door, you could easily violate the noise ordinance from the Golden Feather, even if you couldn't hear it across the street. And that's such a huge distinction that it's a huge problem, and I think that's a big part of it as well. I want to get back to
Just figuring out sort of which parts of the proposed CZO need to be stricken and left to be governed by the noise ordinance is actually a really big part of it, talking about all that kind of stuff. Anyways.
One thing to keep in mind also about the arts and cultural overlays is that everybody thought it was a really good idea to put all these venues in compact areas. But then they created these extremely dense, extremely loud, extremely heavily trafficked areas that every one of the arts and cultural overlays has had neighborhood complaints. If we were to free up the music a little bit, spread it out a little bit through the neighborhoods, it would be really easy to identify the bad actors and be able to address them individually, instead of having somebody say, all of Frenchman Street or all of Bourbon Street. And that's the problem we have today.
Well, I mean, you have problems with, venues getting sued and having sound attributed to them that is from the street, because they're in a densely packed area. And one thing I was going to say also is that also would reflect the historical reality in a lot of neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Is that the neighborhood embedded music spots and other cultural practices are really important in the red and then in the back.
I just have a quick question. My name is Lori Atkinson. I live in the quarter. I go to school at UNO. I'm a graduate student for urban studies. And I live half a block away from Bourbon Street, so y'all know why I'm here. Is there any sort of language in the zoning ordinance about the vibrations and the bass and the things like that?
That's all noise ordinance.
That's completely being ignored. It's just the
No,
actual
no.
decibel level?
It's not ignored. That's all in the purview of the noise ordinance. And the recent drafted updates to the noise ordinance, which didn't pass, unfortunately, this past April, started to address that problem.
Yeah.
But they were gridlock in council. So that's absolutely important, but it's a totally different discussion.
So the CCO doesn't address issues, and it shouldn't address issues of sound. It should address issues of use of a property or a parcel, right?
On that note, that's really why the building department is not included in anything related to zoning. It's really a building code.
Right, there's also, right.
It's like if you say yes to some type of volume, let's just say whatever it is, it should include noise controlling.
Right.
But that's not how the city's trying to approach it. I actually live on a block off too.
Right, because I mean, there's times that I
It was
can't
very
hear the
solid.
bar, but I can feel the bar. You know what I mean?
It's solvable.
Right, right.
But it's
And
not
that's
required.
election,
It's just
yeah.
not required.
So just to kind of loop that around,
That's not
one of the things that was brought into the discussion this past year is dealing with the science of sound and all this stuff. And that was one of the things that we were trying to work with a lot was to address, again, having the laws address the reality on the ground, noticing the decibel levels aren't actually enough of a nuanced sort of information framing for that. So that, in all of the upcoming discussions in the noise ordinance, that's absolutely in there, and that's super important. And then there was somebody in the back, go ahead.
Yeah, can you talk about the Rampart thing?
Yeah. So, Rampart Street.
Yeah.
So, and I will let other people that have a history of Rampart Street chime in as well.
This isn't it, that's for sure.
That's right. So, Rampart Street, historically has been a corridor. There's historically jazz corridor. There's been clubs. There's been music. We picked this location because we are across the street from Congo Square, right, at the Mardi Gras Indian restaurant that cannot have a live performance, right? And I mean, without getting a permit to have that performance, you can't have regular performances here, where we are across the street from where jazz was invented, right? Where it developed. So Rampart Street itself is now they changed the zoning, right? And I believe it was in the 70 ordinance, but I need to double check that it's now VUCA commercial 2 or different parts of it, but none of that allows live entertainment. And so there were clubs that were here, but when the zoning was changed, once they closed, they couldn't reopen because the grandfathering had expired. They closed more than 6 months. You couldn't reopen.
For any reason,
right.
including
When people tried, they were sued and said the zoning has changed. They won't allow live entertainment here at all. And that's essentially what happened via attrition. There were many attempts. It was actually an attempt in the latest draft of the CZO to make it an arts and culture overlay on Rampart Street. It was defeated due to opposition from various groups. And I think if you look back, when was it? In the early 90s, there was a Rampart Street issue, and again, it was proposed maybe it could be a jazz corridor. That was defeated by neighbor groups, and you see the same names coming up over and over again. So there was a video which we have on our website from 2003, put out by BC Pura and the marketing center that talks about how live entertainment is not a good fit for Rampart Street. So if you want to watch that video, it talks about how live entertainment will destroy property values, it will do all these things, and I won't quote it, I'll just repost it so y'all can watch it. It's about 5 minutes long. So there's been a concerted campaign to end live entertainment on Rampart Street because the argument that I've heard a lot is it will be another Bourbon Street. The argument you hear all again, it'll be another Bourbon Street, it'll be another Bourbon Street. They couldn't enforce that, how will they enforce this?
And even more specifically what I've heard is that it would pin a strip of residents between Bourbon Street and another Bourbon Street. And that, given the lack of enforcement and the issues of sound and, the lack, in some cases, of mitigation of, bass vibrations or what have you, there was this fear of, this fearful image being put out of these residents being trapped with noise on all sides and that kind of thing. So that was sort of very specifically why, this strip in particular was so strongly pushed against.
Yeah, and I think we're at a point now where we have this chance to actually, if people really want to advocate for Rampart Street coming back to what historically was, it doesn't mean, a raucous strip of all these things, but if people want live entertainment venues back in Rampart Street, because there are bars that play music here, there's a lot of bars that play music here, right? There's so much history. There's the studio, right? There's Congo Square, there's so many things. How can this be, how can this be the place that there's no music whatever permitted, right? Not only that, it's a commercial strip, right? This is not, yes, people live here, but let's be honest, this is a commercial strip. It is not a residential strip at this point. It is a mixed use. It is possible to have music and have people live here and everyone can work it out instead of this prohibition on it. And I will leave you to that. Sure. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mark Gonzalez. I'm one of the people with the Riverfront Alliance. And I wanted to maybe preface what I'm saying before you talk about a call to action by actually suggesting a call to action that would include us and working together. Because I haven't heard anything here tonight that I don't agree with. This idea that live entertainment is being regulated is probably quasi-illegal, if not unconstitutional. I'm a lawyer. I mean, you can say that kind of noise is illegal and that kind of noise isn't. It's just kind of a free speech issue, and I may join you in your fight. So I'm not hearing anything here tonight that the Riverfront Alliance wouldn't support. And one of the points we try to make over and over is that one of the greatest areas for music in the city is something that was brought about by the neighborhood. And so what we're all about is neighborhoods. We're about working with neighborhoods. And if you've got problems with neighborhood organizations, we all do. I mean, I've got a problem with one of my neighborhood organizations. So what you do is you try to work through or around them. But I'm not hearing anything here tonight that says that MaCCNO, and I'm a member now too, shouldn't be working and joining with the Riverfront Alliance and getting the CZO fixed. You guys have to, you're really amazing that you're here talking about this incredibly dry, boring subject of our zoning ordinance. But let me kind of show you a different way of looking at zoning. I mean, zoning is why you have neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods didn't develop from top down. I mean, somebody didn't say, we're gonna call this Treme, and we're gonna call this Bywater, and we're gonna, zone it to become Treme and Bywater. That's not the way it happened. It happened organically. And it happened organically because of zoning. And, I want to kind of...
That's a contradictory statement,
I'm not giving you a history lesson, and I may be wrong about implying that the zoning that we have was organically produced, but now is the chance, as you kind of implied, for us to actually have some say-so about what's going to happen with our neighborhoods. And the way we do that is through zoning. And neighborhoods, so anyway, the Riverfront Alliance has never taken any position whatsoever on live entertainment, whether it's amplified, non-amplified music, whatever you want to call it. The Riverfront Alliance takes no position on live entertainment. We take a position about neighborhood involvement in their standard restaurants. That's the point of this. And you need to kind of, one of the things is once you start talking about zoning, you got to start talking in terms of all of these words that mean things. We're talking about standard restaurants here tonight. You're not talking about non-standard restaurants. Standard restaurants is what the issue is about, not coffee houses and McDonald's, actually. So anyway, I wanted to make that point clear, and I wanted to suggest as a call to action that you guys think about actually meeting with the Riverfront Alliance and saying, hey, we want to join you because we think that we're pretty much in agreement.
So
Could I just...
let me quickly just say a little bit, and then I'll open it back up to the floor. I think I did see you join a couple weeks ago, so thank you for that. And I would also say
I made another offer too.
I know I did, which I put out there as well, which was to do notary for musicians, right? So lower no cost notary for musicians. So I will note that as well. So
I've never charged for notarizing music.
I appreciate that, and I don't think anybody's talking about that tonight, so I think we're all right. So, a couple issues is one, the idea that all these issues, yes, I understand the idea of citizen participation, but the idea of high alliances and then looping into these things that involve live entertainment, and it is, I mean, I've read the progression of the notes of the Riverfront Alliance, of the position and how it's changed, and talking about how it does have an impact on neighborhoods, and reading Keith Hardy's Every Street Can't Be Frenchman Street, who is the person that talks directly about the issues of music for the Riverfront Alliance, and talking about how it basically equating live entertainment as something that tourists do, which is counterproductive to what New Orleans is and the identity of the people of New Orleans, where music itself comes from these neighborhoods, and is part of the identity of people in these neighborhoods. And that happened well before zoning was even created. And so the idea that now we need to come in and change people's identities and change what people do. And the fact is, let's be honest, the Riverfront Alliance was 7 organizations, one of which was never approached and sent a letter of cease and desist. So, and then the other ones, there was no attempt to approach other neighborhoods beyond the 6, but you're working on issues that are citywide. And so to not approach the traditional culture-bearing neighborhoods when you're going to talk directly about issues that impact the culture is to me, shows where that is coming from. And I think that's all. So I have to say, so I'm going to open it back up.
Many other neighborhoods to join our organization.
Just a question.
hold on, this is also, this is not meant to be, I guess, about the Riverfront Alliance in any way. If anybody wants more information about them, if anything that you guys have that for anyone to read, we're more than happy to share that information. If anybody.
You can do that in a
Google the website.
I still want to ask a very brief
And
question.
everyone is
about-
welcome to continue this conversation, absolutely.
What are the who are the members of the Riverfront
This is
Alliance?
not about that.
Right, can we get
Take
back?
3 seconds to
Because now we
say
have
who it is.
50
Listen, I want to say it's as our website, just because I don't want this, because what we're saying is not opposing what they're doing, we're talking about different things. And so I want to, don't get me
Tonight's
stop
about
this
MaCCNO, I agree.
right, and I want to draw the distinction is, this meeting is not opposing what they're doing, their meeting is not opposing what we're doing, we're working on different things that sometimes interact in ways that are oppositional, right? So let me say that, so I would rather we focus on what we need to do, and they focus on what they feel they need to do. And if we want to talk about that, we'll continue to talk about that.
Speaking of what we need to do.
Right.
Next steps, please. Next steps.
So there are.
First of all, I was gonna say, everybody just take like 2 seconds and really look at these suits, because they're really pretty, they're really pretty. And
Thank you,
and pretty
Shaka.
things. Yeah, thank you, Shaka.
And Naima, wherever she went.
So yeah, let's talk about, we are actually done, thank you. The couple of things that we need to do, and part we want to do this is the call to action, because this is the time in which we need to be working on this. And if you look at the way decisions are made, sometimes it's about who shows up and who shows up consistently. And it doesn't, if you can keep hammering the same point over and over and over and over at council meetings or to the planning commission, they start hearing it. And that's where, to be honest, looking at the history, a lot of these issues dealing with culture and music is where things have fallen short, is people haven't been interacting. And it works both ways, because they should absolutely be coming to the community, but going there sometimes matters, right? And a lot of people don't think about zoning, especially if you're a musician, if you're an artist. I just happen to have a degree in urban planning, which is, and I'll be honest, I never wanted to work on zoning ever. But now I'm here talking directly about zoning all the time. But it's not something people, especially creative people, think about, is how do I regulate how this use works? And so we need to be active, and we need to be consistent, and we need to be emailing council members about all these issues and continuing to talk about it, and getting talking points together, because that is what a lot of groups do extremely well, is they are there, and they've been there for 2 years, they've been there for 20 years. The organization that had the lawsuit in 1977, or worked with the council members, was the Maple Area Residents, who is still active in these issues today, right? And still working on these things. That was 37 years ago. And the idea that they're still here working on these issues shows that, A, we've only been around a couple years and we've been able to have some effect, which is good, but this is not something we can just keep reacting to one thing. This is all related. The idea of, to me, changing zoning also impacts how lawsuits can be filed. So if you can change the zoning, it's easier to sue a music venue because the zoning has changed, which is easier to shut it down, which means if the non-conforming use thing isn't changed, then it can never come back. And so there are these connections. So we'll leave it, Mary.
And on your next steps, has anybody taken the proposed code and looked at specific things you want gone or changed?
Yeah, so
Yeah, we have.
And rewritten it?
so we left
have
our
copies of that up front, they might be
Yeah.
on.
we left one of our the comments we sent directly to council. We post them on our website. Absolutely, everyone should read them. Whether you agree with us or not, please read our comments, because we really believe in transparency here as well. So I want to make sure that everyone gets that. And I think there are specifics in there that are some super specific, like change this word to this.
Exactly.
And those are
That's
things.
what they want.
Right, that's exactly what they want. But I would also say it's also about how often and how many people they hear things from. So if we have specifics and then we have a lot of people saying, but we also want to do this, maybe it's a slightly different language, but it's essentially the same, adding that up also means something. So I'll use the example that one thing we've talked a lot about is the zoning ordinance does not regulate sound, right? And one thing sound includes is amplification. Amplification is sound. It's not a use, it is a level of sound. There should not be references to sound in the zoning ordinance. Take that out, we take out a lot of problems, right? And that's something that I think is something we can talk about and people can get behind is take out these references to sound. There is a different ordinance called either the noise or sound ordinance that deals with those issues. So take them out, let that deal with it. That takes away the issue of amplification, which is a problem. Not allowing amplification means you cannot have a keyboard because you can't plug it in. You can't have a microphone. You can't have a singer singing a microphone. It doesn't make any sense. If you take out references to instrumentation, what kind of instruments, which is in various pieces of it, may not be in this one, but or how many instruments, you take all those issues out. Does anyone want to be in a position where you have to define what an instrument is and what is not an instrument? If I pick up a bottle and a stick, do I have an instrument or do I have something else? Do you want the CZO, the people drafting the CZO, to decide?
And by the way, just for fostering communication, we will post and send out all of the contact info for City Council. I'm sorry we don't have that printed here tonight, but we will make that as accessible, as widely accessible.
Your comment, is that what you're talking about?
For everyone to contact their City Council with their comments, we'll make sure that everybody, is empowered to do that with
And your comments are in the back.
Yes, the working sort of MaCCNO draft of what changes we want in the CZO, that's printed up. I don't know if all the copies are gone, but they're floating around here, so.
And yeah, we have it in the back. And I will say
Brian hasn't.
that is the draft we submitted to the planning. We're gonna put up another one and have people do it. But that's one absolute call to action we can do right now, which is have them take out references to sound, amplification, and instrumentation out of the zoning ordinance altogether. And that would solve so many of these issues, right? It would essentially free up a lot of things to be able to
They
happen.
must know that amplification clause would never survive a court case, would it?
No, but why do we want to be positioned to have that court case, right? Why not just take it
No,
out?
but that's what they're counting on, that no one will get around to doing it.
Right, exactly.
They know it's illegal.
Right.
What else? So we have amplification, and then in terms of call to action, what are the other next steps?
So there's two other things I put on my list, which are, and anybody can throw in anything as well. One would be to work to protect neighborhood venues. And the way that we need to do that still needs a little bit of wording, but it involves dealing with non-conforming uses and changing this dynamic that if you shut down